There's an 885-foot stone wall on a Georgia summit that no tribe will claim, a carved boulder locals tell you to never touch, and rock shelters in Kentucky whose locations are guarded with silence. Most people think Appalachia is overlooks, fall color, and a scenic parkway. That version is 250 years deep, and the people who've lived here for 10,000 years know which places you walk around, not through. And the last place on this list was never abandoned at all. Number 15. A fort that guards nothing. Settlers found stone walls on a Tennessee plateau and did what settlers always did. They called it a fort. It's the Old Stone Fort near Manchester, Tennessee, 50 acres of stacked stone and earth sitting where two forks of the Duck River nearly meet. And it defends nothing. It never did. Walk the single narrow entrance and you'll notice something no fort would bother with. It points at the sunrise, specifically the summer solstice sunrise. For a long time, locals credited the walls to Vikings, or a wandering Welsh prince, or Spanish explorers. Anyone, really, except the people who actually built it. Excavations settled that decades ago. The walls went up between roughly 1,500 and 2,000 years ago, raised over generations by woodland people. Here's the part that lingers. Archaeologists found no houses inside, no burials, no trash, none of the ordinary mess of living. For centuries, people entered through that aligned corridor, did whatever they came to do, and kept the space clean. Then they stopped coming entirely, and no later people ever moved in or built on it. Think about that. This is the oldest form of avoidance on the entire list. The builders themselves decided this was not ground you live on, and for 2,000 years, nobody argued. One thing before we go deeper, and then I won't bring it up again. Everything in this video, plus the places that didn't make the cut, comes out of a longer project I've put into a book called the Appalachian Mysteries Collection. If you want the full map, the link is in the description. That's all. Back to the countdown. Number 14. The wall nobody claims. Here's the wall from the opening. 885 feet of stacked rock zigzagging across a summit in the Kituwah Mountains of North Georgia, and its builders are officially listed as unknown. Fort Mountain sits at about 2,800 feet, and the wall runs knee-high through the mountain laurel near the top, broken by 29 pit-like depressions nobody has convincingly explained. The name promises a fort. The wall refuses the job. It's too low to stop anyone, placed with no military logic, and generally read as ancient ceremonial work. That would settle it, except for one detail. When early settlers asked the Cherokee about the wall, the Cherokee didn't claim it. They said it belonged to someone else, the moon-eyed people, a pale race who saw in the dark, who lived in these mountains first, until the Cherokee drove them out. That tradition was written down as early as 1797. And to be clear, it's oral tradition, not evidence, but it hangs over the wall like weather. The oldest surviving nation in this region looked at this structure and said, essentially, not ours, and not ground we care to explain. Remember the moon-eyed people. They come back near the end of this list, and next time, they have a face. Number 13, where the giant held court. There's a bare rock dome on the Blue Ridge Parkway that got named after the devil, and the older story underneath is stranger than the name. Devil's Courthouse rises to about 5,700 feet in the mountains of western North Carolina, a wall of exposed cliff you can see straight from the road. The settler legend says the devil held court inside the rock. The Cherokee tradition is older and more specific. This mountain belongs to Judaculla, called Judaculla, a slant-eyed giant, master of all the game animals, who was said to dance and hold judgment in a cavern inside the peak. Stand at the overlook, and you can feel why the stories chose this spot. The rock face drops away like something cut, not weathered. Now, here's the honest layer. Nobody has documented a great cavern inside the mountain. The cave is tradition, not survey, but the avoidance is real, and it's written into the name itself. Generations of people, Cherokee and settler alike, marked this as a place where something else was in charge. And today, the cliffs are seasonally closed anyway, because peregrine falcons nest on them, and the park asks you to stay off the rock. Which means the courthouse is still doing what it always did, keeping people at the overlook and off the peak. Number 12, the mountain children feared. Whiteside Mountain near Highlands, North Carolina has some of the highest sheer cliffs in the eastern United States, and in the old Cherokee stories, that's not what made it dangerous. This is the mountain tied to Utlunta, the spearfinger, a monster in the shape of an old woman with skin like stone and a long blade of bone for a finger, who was said to wait along the trails and take the livers of travelers, especially children. Cherokee tradition places her in this exact stretch of country, walking the ridges around Whiteside. Picture being a kid in these mountains 200 years ago, hearing that story, and then looking up at a 700-foot wall of pale granite. That's not a campfire tale, that's a boundary, and that's exactly what stories like this were. Careful tellings of the legend point out it worked as a warning, keeping children close to camp and travelers alert in country where the cliffs alone could kill you. The mountain itself is settled science, one of the oldest exposed rock faces in the region. The fear is folklore, and I'll label it that plainly. But for generations, this was ground you crossed quickly and carefully. The trail's popular now. The story hasn't gone anywhere. Locals still tell it, and some of them will tell you which sections of the old trails they were told to hurry through. Number 11, the cave that outlived everyone. One rock shelter in the far corner of northeast Alabama holds a nearly continuous record of human life longer than all of written history. Russell Cave opens in a hillside near Bridgeport, a wide, dark mouth above a creek, protected as a national monument since 1961. Stand at the entrance, and you're standing where cooking fires burned, on and off, for roughly 10,000 winters. Digs cut down through the floor and found the whole sequence intact. Charcoal, spear points, bone tools, layer under layer under layer. Here's the astonishing part. It's not the age, it's the continuity. Cultures that never met each other, separated by more time than separates us from the pyramids, kept independently choosing this same room. Same ceiling, same water, same shelter from the same winters. And people were buried here too, which is worth sitting with. This isn't just a campsite, it's a grave. Today you can visit the entrance, but the deeper cave is closed to the public, partly to protect what's in there, and partly to protect the bats that winter inside. So the arrangement has quietly returned to what it was for most of 10,000 years. People stand at the mouth. The dark keeps the rest. And honestly, that feels right, because you don't wander deep into someone's grave. Let's take stock. So far, everything on this list you could drive to, more or less: walls, cliffs, a cave mouth. That layer ends here. The next places survived by staying hard to find. And the last place on this list, the one locals guard hardest, isn't hidden at all. Number 10, the border. Written in paint, a cliff on the French Broad River served as a legal document centuries before paper ever reached these mountains. Paint Rock rises about 100 feet over the water near Hot Springs, North Carolina, a few steps from the Tennessee line, and drivers pass under it at speed without ever looking up. High on the rock face, faded red markings still hold. Ochre pictographs that 18th century treaties cited by name as a boundary of Cherokee territory. Surveyors used it, governments used it, and here's the strange part. The paint is far older than any of them. Research on the pigments suggests some of the markings may be thousands of years old, left by people whose names and language are gone. The later nations didn't create the marker. They inherited it and simply agreed it still counted. Now think about what a boundary actually is. It's a place you're not supposed to pass. For generations, this rock was the official line beyond which settlers were not to go. A warning painted on stone in a script nobody alive can read. And the settlers who pushed past it did so knowing exactly which line they were breaking. Two governments drew maps from a signature neither of them could translate. The border was legal. The document is still illegible. And it's still up there, fading at its own pace, outlasting every jurisdiction that ever leaned on it. Number 9. The shelters locals won't name. The cliffs of the Red River Gorge in Kentucky are famous for rock climbing, and almost nobody hanging off them realizes what's in the rock behind them. Hundreds of dry sandstone shelters pock these canyon walls, and the dryness is the whole story. For thousands of years, those shelters preserved things that rot everywhere else. Seeds, textiles, woven sandals. Material from these shelters proved that people in these mountains domesticated sunflower, goosefoot, and squash more than 3,000 years ago. That made this region one of the world's independent birthplaces of agriculture. It rewrote the textbooks. Now look down at the shelter floors. They're cratered with looters' holes, generations of them dug by shovel and by hand, hauling artifacts out by the truckload before federal protection ever arrived. Every hole destroyed the one thing that made a find scientific, which is knowing exactly where it sat. The first farmers on this continent left receipts, and we burned most of the filing cabinet. So here's what avoidance looks like in the gorge today. The locals and researchers who know where the intact shelters are simply won't tell you. They don't post them. They don't name them. Ask where the good ones are, and watch the conversation change subjects. Silence is the last lock left on the door. Number 8, the walls that got deleted. Old accounts from the 1800s describe miles of stone walls running along the ridge tops above the Kanawha River in West Virginia. Try to measure them today, and you mostly can't, because the evidence has been consumed. Above the town of Mount Carbon, early surveyors and later researchers recorded long, dry-laid walls and stone piles climbing the mountain. Structures with no agreed date, builder, or purpose. What's left now are fragments. Low lines of stacked rock scattered through the leaf litter, pieces of something that used to be continuous. This is coal country, and the industrial age was not sentimental. Mining, road cuts, and casual dismantling took the walls apart faster than anyone thought to map them. And be precise about what kind of mystery this is, because it matters. Who built these walls was probably an answerable question. Ordinary archaeology. The evidence was just destroyed before anyone did the work. So, one of the largest ancient constructions in the Appalachians now exists mostly as testimony. Old accounts, scattered stones, and a gap where the answer used to be. Which is why the people who study what survives don't publicize where the fragments are. The mountain kept those walls for centuries, maybe far longer. The industrial age needed about one. And the people who know where the surviving fragments sit don't hand out directions, same as the gorge. What's left is protected, the only way left. Quietly. Notice what just happened. We've gone from places locals walk around to places locals actively hide. The next stretch is worse, because now the record itself starts lying. A planted fake inside a real dig. Lights that ignore their own explanations. And we're getting close to the ground that was bought back. Number 7, the valley you can't visit. One entry on this list you cannot visit no matter what, because it's underwater. The Bat Creek site sat among mounds near the Little Tennessee River in eastern Tennessee, in a valley that held native towns continuously for thousands of years. In 1889, during the Smithsonian's Great Mound Survey, a field assistant dug a small inscribed stone out of one of those mounds. Decades later, a scholar announced the scratches were ancient Hebrew, and the stone became the crown jewel of every lost tribes theory in America. Here's what the careful work found. Archaeologists traced the characters to an illustration in a Masonic reference book printed shortly before the dig. The mainstream conclusion is blunt. A planted fake slipped into a legitimate excavation. That's the noise. Now here's the loss underneath it. While that fraud soaked up a century of attention, the genuinely ancient valley around it, real towns, real mounds, real continuity, was flooded in 1979 under Tellico Reservoir. Stand at the shoreline today, and there's nothing but flat water. Some of the deepest history in the Appalachians is a place nobody refuses to visit. It's a place nobody can. The fake stone got the headlines. The real landscape got the flood. Number 6. The lights nobody chases. The government explained the Brown Mountain lights twice. The lights didn't cooperate. Brown Mountain is a low, unremarkable ridge near Linville Gorge in North Carolina. And on certain nights, people watch small glows rise over the tree line, drift, flare, and vanish. Cherokee tradition described spirit lights on this ridge long before settlers arrived, and written reports run steadily from the 1800s to now. Federal geologists investigated in 1913 and again in 1922 and blamed train headlights, car lamps, and brush fires bending through humid air. Reasonable. Also incomplete. Reports of the lights predate the railroad and accounts from the 1916 flood, when trains and power were knocked out for days, say the lights showed up anyway. Modern researchers propose distant man-made lights bent by the atmosphere, plus, possibly, rarer natural effects in a minority of cases. And cameras still run on that ridge today. Here's the honest scorecard. Most sightings probably have boring explanations. A residue does not. And notice how everyone actually behaves. Locals watch from the overlooks, across the gorge, at a distance. Nobody walks that ridge at night hunting the source, and folks who grew up there will tell you plainly, they don't intend to start. Mostly explained is not the same as explained. Number 5, the ruins they stopped showing. There's a carving site in the North Georgia mountains with a second stranger site up the slope. One you're no longer invited to see. Track Rock Gap sits below Brasstown Bald, a cluster of soapstone boulders beside the road, carved with more than 100 figures. Animal tracks, crosses, circles, probably accumulated over 1,000 years or more. Up the mountainside stand low stone terrace ruins, attributed by archaeologists to ancestral native builders. For centuries, the carving sat in the open, and the arrangement worked. Then, in 2011, a viral article declared the terraces a lost Maya city. Archaeologists refuted it in detail. The terraces match regional native construction, not anything Mesoamerican. But the internet had already decided. Traffic surged. And then came the part nobody puts in a brochure. Vandalism. Carvings were defaced. And the Forest Service ended up bolting protective covers over rock art that had survived 10 centuries of open weather, while access to the terraces tightened. So pay attention to what refusing to visit means here. It means the locals refuse to publicize. Guides stopped pointing. Directions stopped being given. Silence became the preservation plan. The site survived 1,000 winters. It very nearly didn't survive one viral post. Number 4, the mound nobody climbs. A sacred mound sits in the middle of a town's business district, and there's an unwritten rule about it that most tourists never notice. Drive through downtown Franklin, North Carolina, and there it is, a grassy earthwork between storefronts and the Little Tennessee River, older than every building in sight, with traffic circling it like landscaping. It isn't landscaping, this is Nikwasi, one of the Cherokee mother towns, a major community whose council house once stood on that mound before soldiers burned the town in the 1700s, and Franklin grew over the rest. Cherokee tradition holds more still, that the Nunahai immortal protectors, live inside the mound and once rose out of it to defend the town. That's oral tradition, and I'll call it that, but it explains the rule. You don't climb the mound. Locals know it. The Cherokee ask it. You stand at the base, and you stay there. The modern history is rough. The town bought the mound in 1946 to save it from being leveled. Then, decades later, a herbicide spraying killed the grass and left it brown. And the outrage from the Eastern Band reopened the whole question of who should be keeping this ground. In 2019, Franklin deeded the mound to a nonprofit built on Cherokee partnership. 200 years of growing around it, and the paperwork finally caught up with the geography. 3 left. And notice the turn we just made, because the title of this video is about to flip. These last places aren't avoided out of fear. They're avoided out of respect. A rock you don't touch, a statue people keep behind glass, and the mother town that was never empty. Number 3, the rock you don't touch. The most heavily carved boulder in the eastern United States sits in a quiet cove pasture near Kituwah, North Carolina. And after generations of study, the number of successful translations stands at 0. Judaculla rock is a slab of soapstone crowded with more than 1,500 carvings, cup marks, winding lines, stick figures, handprints, one of them with 7 fingers. Come at dusk, when the light drops low and the surface changes. Marks you can't see at noon rise out of the stone in shadow. The archaeology is solid as far as it goes. The same outcrop carries ancient quarrying scars because people were cutting bowls from this rock thousands of years ago, and the carvings likely built up over centuries of ceremonial use. Cherokee tradition reads it differently, and you already know the name. This is the mark of Judaculla, the same giant from the Courthouse Mountain earlier in this list, who leapt from his home ridge and landed here, leaving his print in the rock. And the etiquette around the boulder is real and current. You don't touch it. You don't chalk it, rub it, or climb it. The Cherokee regard it as sacred. The site is fenced and monitored, and people raised nearby will tell you it's not a place you handle. Legend and science disagree about the author. They agree it was written to be read. Every visitor arrives equally illiterate. Number 2, a statue of vanished people. Remember the wall on Fort Mountain, the one the Cherokee said belonged to a pale people who saw in the dark? That legend has a physical exhibit. In a small county museum in Murphy, North Carolina, a soapstone statue stands in a glass case. 2 blank-faced figures, joined side by side and about 3 feet tall, were reportedly dug up near Murphy in the 1840s. The tradition itself is old and well documented, recorded from Cherokee sources in the 1790s. The Moon-Eyed people, who saw at night, lived in these mountains first and were driven out. The statue is genuinely ancient and genuinely local. That much holds. Who carved it, when, and what the 2 figures meant remain undetermined. And I'll be careful here because linking the statue to the legend is interpretation, not fact. But step back and look at the pattern nobody outside these mountains ever assembles. An unclaimed wall on a Georgia summit, a tradition written down before 1800, a conjoined figure pulled from the ground a generation later. None of that proves a vanished earlier people. It might preserve the memory of one. It might explain the ruins nobody claims. Locals in Murphy treat the thing with a certain wary respect, and honestly, stand in front of those 2 blank faces for a minute and you'll understand why. Most legends fade for lack of evidence. This one keeps acquiring it. Number 1, the town that never emptied. Here's the place promised at the start, and the first thing to understand is that it breaks the rules of everything before it. Kituwah is not hidden, not lost, not unexplained. In a broad river-bottom field along the Tuckasegee River near Bryson City, North Carolina, sits a low green rise, barely 5 feet high after a century of plowing under white ownership. Easy to drive past, impossible to overstate. This is the mother town, the birthplace of the Cherokee people, occupied for thousands of years, so foundational that the Cherokees' own name for themselves, Ani Kituwah, comes from this ground and is older than the word Cherokee itself. It was burned by soldiers in the 1700s, lost in the removals, farmed nearly flat. For years it sat next to a small airstrip. And through every one of those generations, the Eastern Band never stopped knowing exactly where it was. In 1996, the tribe bought the 309 acres back. Ceremonies returned to the field. In 2010, when a power substation was proposed on the ridge above it, the tribe fought the siting and won. So now the title of this video finally makes sense. Locals refuse to visit Kituwah the way you visit an attraction, because you don't sightsee your own church. It's active, sacred ground, and outsiders are asked to approach with restraint. Every place on this list was evidence that an older map survives under the tourist one. Kituwah is proof that the older map still has owners, and they've been reading it the whole time. The most ancient place in the Appalachians is not a mystery. It's an address, and the family moved back in. The Appalachia on the postcard is a thin modern layer, parkways and overlooks laid over 10,000 years of walls, mounds, carvings, and guarded ground the scenic pullouts never mention. So tell me in the comments about the place near you, the mound, the carving, the stretch of woods people quietly walk around. Because those are the ones we're hunting next. Subscribe if you want the rest of the map, and the next investigation is already waiting on your screen.